Byzantine Empire in the 11th century left behind very limited sources. In the study of Western esotericism, there was one man living in this period who Renaissance thinkers, historians of philosophy, and all lovers of the Hermetic text and grimoire magic owe a monumental debt. His name, as history would remember it, was Micheal Psellus, born around 1018 AD. He was born in Constantinople to aristocratic parents, and rose through a glittering Orthodox Christian and classical education into a lofty station in the imperial court, where he served as consul of philosophers, in many capacities as a political advisor to a succession of emperors. He was a historian, philosopher, writer, and a member of various administrations. His most famous work is the Chronographia, which covers 98 years of Byzantine history and provides close, elbow-to-elbow accounts of the imperial court. When he was 25, he was rigorously training in rhetoric and philosophy, and believed in a balanced blend of the two, rather than merely the sophistry of orators on one side, who value the eloquence of their language more than the mysteries of the universe, and the philosopher hermits on the other, who value reasoned contemplation more than waxing eloquent on what they'd learned. He believed philosophy's aim was, quote, to explore the nature of the universe, to unravel its secrets. Its lofty dictums are not even confined to the visible world. For the great subtlety it praises the glory of that realm, whatever it may be, that lies beyond the heaven. He started his classical education being tutored with the books of Plato and Aristotle, and, quote, starting from these authors, I completed a cycle, so to speak, by coming down to Plotinus, Porphyry, and Iamblichus. Then, continuing my voyage, I put in at the mighty harbor of the admirable Proclus, eagerly picking up there his doctrine of perception. But he believed that the new philosophy, based on the mystery of the Christian religion, transcended all ancient systems, and in Psellus's day, as he held it, quote, neither Athens, nor Nicomedia, nor Alexandria in Egypt, nor Phoenicia, nor even the two Romes, nor any other state glories any longer in literary achievement. For these golden streams of the past were dammed and choked up by his time. Nonetheless, as the record shows, Psellus made good use of what he'd learned from these streams. But it is not Psellus, the imperial historian, or even the crafty courtier, who we intend to study, but Psellus's Demonology, as presented in his small treatise on the Operation of Daemons, which is at once spine-chillingly horrifying, captivating, ambiguous, and adversarial. Shortly, you may see why it fits these descriptions and is worthy of many more. Despite the rarity of recent English translations, the treatise may as well be a 1,000-foot-tall flagpole in the history of demonology that reads, all else after me relies upon me. By this I mean to say that in Psellus we find a center point on a bridge connecting the classical and ancient understanding of daemons, including that given in the Bible, with the modern understanding of related anomalies, such as those evils expelled during exorcisms, those archangels felt or imagined, and those anomalous range of somethings which roam the skies and seas as unknown anomalous phenomena. Whether or not these anomalies should all be treated as a reality or included in a study of demonology is not the challenge of this essay. Rather, we hope to illustrate Psellus's contributions to demonology, first reviewing where some of his conceptions are drawn from and thereby making it apparent to the listener where they led long after his time. It isn't every day that a figure simultaneously connects to the Greek poetry of Hesiod, the demon magic of the Chaldeans, the personal daemon of Socrates, the angelic hierarchies of the Bible, the Renaissance magicians, the Hermetic manuscripts, and the development of the practice of exorcism all in one. Therefore, to analyze Psellus's little treatise with some color in our lens, let's set the stage with our sources and clean up a little bit of biblical mistranslations. Psellus displays a certain fascination with heresies, as is seen in his other writings, such as his odes to the emperors. His treatise on Daemons is a direct treatment of heresies, allegedly perpetrated by the Euchites and Bogomils, while at the same time, the text is perhaps a chance for him to introduce his personal knowledge of daemons, conducted with care so as not to alarm certain Christian authorities who did at one point nearly exile Psellus for his close relationship with pagan practices such as theurgy, another subject refined through the Neoplatonists Psellus studied. Psellus would not have been ignorant of the earliest Greek account of daemons, including those in Plato's writings, nor would he be able to ignore the scathing treatment of non-Christian philosophers by the Church Fathers at the roots of his religion. But before we squint through Psellus's text, we are reminded of some of the earliest accounts of evil spirits. For millennia, Egyptians, Persians, Chaldeans, and Greeks believed in a grade of beings, now lumped into the demonic class. The spirit worlds in Mesopotamia and Egypt were active, magical aspects of daily life. Some spirits were seen as negotiable and pleasant, and others were wicked sources of physical diseases and the object of totemic terror, warded off throughout the centuries in different ways, whether through the placement of the statues or figures of gods, the recitation and incantation of certain magical words and spells, or through the wearing of amulets as was so pervasive in ancient Egypt. Pertinent to our subject, then, would be all of these developments and what residue they left on the Roman Empire and the early Christian tradition. If Greek and Chaldean development on daemons played into the alleged beliefs of the Euchites, who Psellus condemns as heretics, we find ourselves wondering if all of Psellus's reports of the gross actions of the Euchites and their complex demonology is reported in good faith, or if it was, more likely, often exaggerated, following in much the same vein as earlier Christian apologists, who wrote off many beings they could not explain as an angel as one or another species of daemon. However, as Psellus would have also known, it was not always the case that daemons were wholly evil, but rather they were seen as divinities existing between gods and humans, with one particular daemon being the guardian spirit of the individual. Psellus provides clever rationales for blending certain pagan traditions into his Christian knowledge base, at one point justifying his interest in oracles by calling them, quote, correct and full of Christian teaching. He also references the famous Chaldean oracles, which he claims to have subordinated to our Christian scriptures. He credits Hellenic literature with teaching him about the different aromata and vapors which drive away evil spirits, and also takes up an interest in theurgy and astrology, and appears to have access to some version of the Greco-Egyptian magical texts, where numerous methods for summoning or banishing subordinate spirits and even gods had been recorded ad nauseum. But for Christian thinkers, some level of magical understanding needed to be called upon to wrestle with the miracles Jesus performed in the Gospels. Is the difference between heretical magic and divinely sanctioned miracles based merely on the preference of a Christian theologian? Or was there more to it? Were these other forces and demonic creatures so real they could not be ignored, so distinct they warranted classes unto themselves? In Matthew 12, Jesus drives out demons from a possessed man in a manner that suggested to nearby Pharisees that Jesus used Beelzebul, the prince of demons, to drive them out. Dozens of times, Jesus is mentioned casting out demons, which certain of his disciples also learned to do. But Jesus is by no means introducing this art. Demonologies of the ancient Babylonians and Assyrians, well before Jesus, had already organized a rich series of superstitions and means to deter evil spirits. In one Assyrian incantation, we find demons of the desert, of the sea, the mountain, and the marsh. There is one demon who is an evil genius, and the demon who, quote, seizes man, and others cause ulcers, fevers, plagues, and sorceries. There are many grades of evil spirits, phantoms, and vampires, some who can possess the tongue of man or their rage and anger. In fact, in some ways, all of our typical 7 deadly sins have, in Chaldeo, Assyrian, and Akkadian systems, demonic counterparts. The terrible demons called the Mascum are credited with much destructive action. They violently attack the dwellings of man. They wither everything in the town or in the country. They pour down like a violent tempest in heaven and earth. Around 1200 BC, it was recorded on the Bintresh Stele, a story relating to Pharaoh Ramses III, who visited the chiefs of different countries throughout Mesopotamia and took to bride one eldest daughter of a prince of a land called Bectin, thought to have been in western Syria. The prince later beseeched the pharaoh to aid in exorcising an evil spirit from one of his younger daughters. "I have come unto thee, O my sovereign lord, on behalf of my lady, for behold, an evil disease hath laid upon her body. I beseech thy majesty to send a physician to see her." The pharaoh ordered the books of the double house of life to be brought in with its sages. One such wise man was selected and set out to Bectin to work this magic, but found that the demon possessing the woman was beyond his powers to expel. The prince of Bectin therefore requested a god instead be sent back to her. And so back in Egypt, at a temple of the god Khonsu, a statue of the god was infused with magical power and sent with a team of chariots and horses back to Bectin, where a ceremony was performed that finally expelled the demon. This anecdote contributes to the idea that the demonologies of Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia were similar enough to work in tandem. If we turn forward to the Greeks, specifically to Hesiod, the different ages of mankind are described, beginning with the golden and gradually degrading into the silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. When the first immortal god made a golden race of man, they lived like gods without sorrow of heart, remote and free from toil and grief. Miserable age rested not on them, but with legs and arms never failing, they made merry with feasting beyond the reach of all evils. When they died, it was as though they were overcome with sleep, and they had all good things. But after earth had covered this generation, they are called pure spirits dwelling on the earth, and are kindly, delivering from harm, and guardians of mortal men. For they roam everywhere over the earth, clothed in mist, and keep watch on judgments and cruel deeds, givers of wealth. With Homer and other writers contributing to this notion of daemons as helpful guiding spirits who were once humans, we find Platonic development on the subject running along much the same thread. Every Platonist knew about the personal daemon of Socrates, who often intervened in Socrates' life to steer him away from bad decisions. In Plato's Symposium, he has the seeress Diotima of Mantinea explain that daemons, quote, act as interpreters and conveyors of human things to the gods, of divine things to men. They carry the prayers and sacrifices of men. Occupying a place between the two, they fill a gap and cause the whole universe to be a coherent whole. We are also told that all divination, priestly art, and magic takes place by means of the daemons, and that, quote, a god has no immediate relation with a man. All converse between men and gods, whether in waking state or sleep, takes place through the daemon kind. These daemons are the same spirit creatures later distinguished into angels and demons in the Christian worldview, stemming from the Greek word daimon, as a divine being or godlike power, and angelos, a Greek word translated as messenger. Depending upon when and where you look, the hierarchies of these spirit beings range from the celestial orders mentioned by Pseudo-Dionysius to various sevenfold demon kinds of the Chaldeans. Psellus classifies 6 types of daemons, which retain certain elemental qualities: the igneous, aerial, terrestrial, aqueous, subterranean, and heliophobic. There is also another daemon, the personal daemon of the Platonists, which later shows up in the Christian worldview as the guardian angel, a spirit type not unknown to certain Zoroastrians who posited a Fravashi, which is a spirit form of a person prior to birth who helps guide them in life. Biblical scripture unequivocally asserts the existence of intermediary divine spirits, but equating angels and archangels to gods was certainly heretical to early Christian authorities, despite the clear resemblance. The Church did struggle with cults of the Archangel Micheal in Turkey. evident also by St. Paul's warning to the Colossians about angel worship. Archangel Michael was, after all, credited with miracles, as one story given by the Byzantine writer Simeon Metaphrastes relates, where in Chone, in Phrygia, a spring of water burst forth just as prophesied by the Apostle John the theologian. One tale of this miracle water goes, quote, "A pagan had a daughter who was mute, which caused him great sorrow. Archangel Michael appeared to him in a dream and told him to take his daughter to the spring, where she'd be cured. The father obeyed, brought his daughter to the spring, and found many people there seeking deliverance. These people were all Christians. The man asked how he should seek healing, and the Christians told him, 'You must pray to the Archangel Michael, in the name of the Father and of the Son and Holy Spirit.' The man prayed, and gave his daughter a drink of the water, and the girl began to speak." Michael, the great subduer of demons, is also the name Michael Psellus took for himself after becoming a monk. Now, daemons in the Hesiodic sense of being the souls of deceased pure men is not so different from the saint and martyr and Virgin Mary worship of later Christians, who prayed to these deceased figures in a manner suggestive of their enduring presence. We can also recognize clear biblical origins for the interpretation of demons as fallen angels, with their chief leader as Satan in Revelation, or Simyaza as in the books of Enoch, or Satanael, who, in the so-called heretical Bogomil sect, once sat at the right hand of God before rebelling. We can see here how the later insertion of Lucifer into this story of fallen angels found itself in older doctrines, including the traditional Gnostic view of the demiurge Yaldabaoth. It is worth mentioning some instances of biblical mistranslations which later informed or misinformed readers about gods and devils, when the word should have been daemons. In Acts 17:18, when we read of certain Epicureans and Stoics criticizing Paul's preaching of the gospel, they say he seemeth to be a setter forth of strange gods. It should read strange daemons. In 1 Corinthians 10:20-21, we have 4 instances of the word devils or diabolos, when we should read daemons. The same goes for Revelation 9:20, 1 Timothy 4:1, and James 2:19 in many translations. Also, when the devil is mentioned alongside other appellations, he's never referred to as a daemon. Therefore, to confound daemons with devils or gods in English doesn't convey the meaning we would hope to otherwise find. Now that we've set up some background on the development of daemons and related spirits, we pass to Psellus's On the Operation of Daemons, presented as a dialogue between 1 Timothy and Thracian. Thracian is returning to Byzantium, recounting the impious characters he met on the journey, specifically that of the Euchites, a Christian sect from Mesopotamia that spread to Anatolia and Thrace, who were condemned as heretical in the late 4th century. Psellus, through the mouth of Thracian, asserts that the Euchites stemmed originally from Mani, the famous founder of the Manichaean religion. Mani was born in the 3rd century, raised in the Persian tradition and a native of Babylon, who attempted to blend Zoroastrian ideas with an elaborate Gnostic theology. Mani claimed the Old Testament was the work of the Prince of Darkness and that the 4 Gospels had been corrupted and embellished with Jewish fictions. Thracian asserts there is no real advantage in hearing about such outlandish daemonry of the sort that stems from Mani. But Timothy refutes this, referencing the advantage physicians have in knowing which drugs are fatal. After laying out disclaimers of unpleasant imagery forthcoming, Thracian proceeds with an overview of the demonic doctrine of the Euchites, of course filtered through Psellus's exaggerations. In their overall theology, the Euchites posited 2 sons and a divine father. The father deity is assigned the celestial supramundane region. The younger celestial son is assigned the atmospheric region, and the elder son is assigned government of worldly things. And in this manner they have divided the universe in 3 parts, which Psellus asserts isn't different from Greek mythology. Some Euchites worship both sons, while others worship only the celestial, and are on their guard with the terrestrial. But a third party have withdrawn from the worship of the celestial son and worship the terrestrial alone. This is the son who is Satanael, who they designate as the creator of plants and animals, the first begotten. The celestial son they denounce as the unnatural persecutor of Satanael. Psellus argues that Satanael has deceived his followers into thinking his throne will be equal to the highest. Here we find a kind of precursor to the Luciferian mythology, for Satanael knows he will be consigned to the outer darkness in the end, but his deceits and bribes blind his followers, to whom Satanael can flaunt worldly riches, material glory, and pleasures of the flesh. Quote, at present, however, they resemble the blind and the deaf and the insane, since they cannot perceive that there is but one Creator. These bid their master farewell and have elected to the place of God, the most abject of all creatures. Timothy asks Thracian, what profit do these Euchites derive from the rejection of the religion of their fathers? Thracian says, as to profit, I do not know that they derive any, but I rather think not. For though the Daemons promise them gold and possessions and notoriety, yet you know they cannot give them any. They do, however, present to the initiated phantasms and flashing appearances, which these men-detesters of God call visions of God. Psellus accuses these Euchite followers of Satanael of committing detestable orgies and rituals where some kind of excrement is consumed. This is apparently one of their secrets. Quote, all I could learn was that the Daemons became friendly and affable on their partaking of the excretions. The idea is that these evil spirits secretly envy mankind and its making in the image of the Father. And so if the Daemons can convince men to sin and thus take on the shame, guilt, and other results of vice, the Daemons may better be gratified and come into those bodies which they have now converted to their own purposes. Of their alleged mystical sacrifice, we hear of the most detestable rituals involving incest, infanticide, and cannibalization. By this, the rituals are marring their pure spiritual aspect with such revolting poison that this pure part of their soul departs, making way for the demonic inhabitation, enabling the demonic tribe to possess them. But even then, the Daemons need more, and so their unquenchable hunger sets out to convince the pious and the pure to convert to their sinful acts, in further insult to the Divine Father. Timothy then recalls his grandfather telling him that the Antichrist was soon at hand, and he feared that even the learned class will fall prey to the sinful practices. But Thracian says none of the Celts or Libyans or other peoples take part in such dark rituals. And now that it is firmly caveated that the subject of Daemons is not being taken up with any fondness but rather disgust, Psellus has given himself license to then further explain how these Daemons manifest to their worshippers and the different varieties of them, essentially beginning a line of conversation that transcends what the Euchites are doing and now applies to Daemons everywhere. As for the Euchite rituals, their purpose is also to achieve some visual manifestation of Daemons. But how can these incorporeal spirits be seen if they do not have a body? To this question, Thracian says, but my good friend, they are not incorporeal. The Daemon tribe have a body and are conversant with corporeal beings, which one may learn even from those holy fathers of our religion, if one only addict himself heartily to magical practices. We hear many too relating how the Daemons appeared to them in bodily form, and the divine Psellus, who beheld invisible things, maintains it, that not merely the Daemons but even the pure angels have bodies, being a sort of thin, aerial, and pure spirit, and in proof of this he adduces the testimony of David, most celebrated of the prophets, saying, he maketh his angels spirits, and his messengers a flame of fire. Christian authors apparently still called thin, angelic bodies, which elude sight and touch incorporeal, when really they have a different sort of body altogether. In the modern diction, we might consider these bodies as quasi-physical, partaking in the physical density only to a degree. Indeed, if the angels could not downgrade their being to inhabit the physical world and copulate with the daughters of men, how would they have ever fallen to begin with? And it is this fallen angels mythos which permeates the Euchite demonology and certainly other so-called heretical Christian sects during Psellus's time. Quote, "For the angelic, emitting a sort of extraneous rays is oppressive and intolerable to the visual organs. But as to the demonic, whether it was once of this sort I cannot say, but so it would seem. But the angelic nature is immaterial, and therefore is capable of penetrating and passing through all solids, being more impalpable than the sun's rays." The daemons who may have once been among the angelic tribe are now darksome and low in aspect, and partake of materiality to a higher degree. But since they are not wholly embodied, and yet demand suffering and punishment of some sort, they undergo their suffering through the torment of other bodies converted to their energy. At this stage in the dialogue, Thracian brings up a story of a monk named Marcus in Mesopotamia who, quote, "really was an initiated inspector of demonic phantasms." And the monk Marcus tells him about daemons who are capable of animal passions, producing sperm and secreting worms with it. These daemons who are allied with matter, Marcus says, derive nutriment from a certain kind of moisture, acting like sponges or parasites. When asked of their variety, Marcus says, "There are many, and of every possible variety of figure and conformation, so that the air is full of them, both that above and that around us. The earth and the sea are full of them, in the lowest subterranean depths." Thracian elaborates on the 6 species of God-hating daemons Marcus instructs him in, distinguished by their habits and the degree of their attachment to bodies. The igneous, fiery daemons haunt the air just above the earth, who have been expelled from the regions adjacent to the moon. The second class are the aerial daemons, which occupy the same air we do, and then we have the terrestrial, dwelling on the earth. Both the terrestrial and aerial daemons are capable of using cunning tricks to deceive men into lustful, unlawful actions. Then the aquatic daemons of the waters and the sea drown all of those who seek for them, and the subterranean class, who seek to infiltrate a man's lungs and can render their victims epileptic and insane. Finally, the lucifugus or heliophobic daemons, who hide from sunlight. These daemons, quote, "impair men's intellects by fantasies and illusions." Marcus says they do this by leading us into reminiscences. For when we are in an imaginative spirit, approaching by virtue of their spiritual nature, they whisper descriptions of sensual delights and pleasures. Not that they actually emit distinct sounds, but they insinuate a sort of murmur that serves with them the place of words. In this manner, we find a teaching that presents daemons as intrusive thoughts, dark thoughts, and the source of involuntary visions that render out a feeling of guilt in those who haven't yet committed a wrongdoing. Quote, "Also the daemons, assuming appearances and colors, and whatever forms they please, transport them into our animal spirit, and occasion us, in consequence, a vast deal of trouble, suggesting designs, reviving the recollection of pleasures, obtruding representations of sensual delights, both waking and sleeping, sometimes, too, rousing the baser passions by titillations. They excite to insane and unnatural amours, and especially when they find warm perspirations, for in this way, donning Pluto's helmet, with craft and the most refined subtlety, they create a commotion in men's minds." And yet Psellus mentions another description of daemons which suggests they possess no wit at all, but are a dangerous force, which can cause injury and disease, and subvert the natural habits of humans and animals. Marcus taught that some daemons seek to inhabit animals merely from an intense desire for warmth, due to the daemons inhabiting depths that are excessively cold, and yet the daemons avoid fire for fear of being scorched. Quote, "When a subterranean daemon assails one, he agitates and distorts the person possessed and speaks through him, using the tongue of the sufferer as if it were his own member. But if a lucifugus daemon clandestinely possesses a person, it occasions a relaxation of his whole system, stops his utterance, and almost leaves the sufferer dead." Physical ailments treated by medicines and the physician's art are distinguished from certain diseases that Marcus suggests are exclusively caused by daemons. Quote, "But enthusiasms and madness and possessions, with which when one is seized he is incapable of making any use of judgment. His tongue, his imagination, his senses, It is quite another thing that moves and excites them, and speaks what the person seized is unconscious of uttering. And now the character Thracian recalls a direct encounter with a prophetic man, perhaps one of the Euchites, who communed with daemons. For a man in that place was in the habit of delivering oracles after the manner of the priests of the sun god, and among other things, predicted not a few concerning myself. The oracular man predicted to his initiates that the mysteries of their worship would be persecuted, and their faith abandoned after someone among the crowd apprehended him. This persecutor in the crowd was Thracian, and the oracular man was able to predict the facial features and occupation of Thracian without meeting him. When Thracian pressed this prophet as to the source of his prophetic art, the prophet finally confessed that he had come to, quote, the knowledge of demoniacal practices through a certain vagabond African, who, bringing him by night to a mountain, causing him to partake of a certain herb, spitting into his mouth and anointing his eyes with a certain unguent, enabled him to see a host of daemons, from among which he perceived a sort of raven fly towards him and down his throat into his stomach. From that time up to the present moment he could predict, but only respecting such things and at such times as the daemon who possessed him wished. This bizarre initiation, coupled with the intake of some unnamed herb, appears to have rendered psychedelic visions or otherwise peeled open the prophet's awareness until the demonic world opened. This anecdote brings to mind the parapsychological abilities such as telepathy and remote viewing, except this prophet's powers were admittedly not his own, but that of the daemons he consorted with. Timothy takes up the next segment of dialogue, saying he was of the opinion that the daemons were somehow caused by movements of matter until his elder brother's wife became laden with fits and ravings. This perverse woman, who had already contracted diseases, was isolated to her bedchamber, tearing at the sheets and raving in a state of glossolalia, speaking some depraved, unknown language. But a certain bald and dark-skinned Armenian exorcist came to her bedside with a raised sword. At this the woman berated him in the Armenian tongue, despite never having seen an Armenian or ever learning the Armenian language. The exorcist threatens her with the sword, and she shakes violently before falling asleep. Timothy says, on her recovery, I asked what she had undergone, and if she could recall to mind anything that had occurred, and she said she saw some sort of darksome specter resembling a woman, with her hair disheveled, springing upon her, that in her terror she had fallen on the bed, and from that time had no recollection of what had occurred. This launches Timothy and Thracian into wonderment. For is it now reasonable to suppose that daemons can speak Greek or Persian as they please? And why should a daemon fear the swing of a sword? Thracian admits there is no way to know these things, and hesitantly suggests that daemons transform themselves into whatever best suits them to possess their victims. The body of daemons are, quote, susceptible to all kinds of hues, as is the atmosphere, such is the body of daemons, owing to the imaginative energy inherent in it, and which extends to it the appearance of colors. For daemons are capable of presenting themselves in a wild variety of types and colors and animal or human-like forms. Thracian further suggests it was daemons who delivered oracles through the Greeks, and perhaps daemons, like angels, are prone to take on characteristics of the nations they prefer. This is certainly insufficient, and indeed, the question of daemons fearing a sword remains. Thracian explains that since daemons are so allied with matter and eager to dominate or corrupt bodies, they are likewise interfered with by the same matter and bodies they've clung to. Even so, spiritual beings are also sensitive, being able to see, hear, and touch, but in their unique ways. This is why exorcists leave sharp objects around them to deter fearful demons, and is the same reasoning they employ when leaving substances or items around which may lure demons in. In further explaining how some of the aerial daemons play tricks on their worshippers, Thracian says in a most interesting passage, quote, however, fiery meteors, such as are usually called falling stars, descend from them onto their worshippers, which the madmen have the hardihood to call visions of God. Now the question is posed as to how daemons possess foreknowledge of the kind which lets their worshippers make predictions and receive accurate visions of distant or unknown things. But Thracian, apparently pressed for time, unfortunately leaves the dialogue on the cliff's edge, allowing him to abruptly slip away from setting a capstone on the treatise. It is worth emphasizing that the Euchites did not all fall into the category of satanic practice, and we don't know how much of Psellus's depictions of them are genuine. But the name Euchites itself plays into what we imagine them to be. This Hebrew name, signifying praying men, has it that they prayed so often in order to shield themselves from intrusive thoughts, performing in this manner a kind of spiritual defense. For they believed the mind of every man was inhabited by an evil daemon, if not the spirit of Satanael, expelled only by constant prayer and hymns. Of course, if Psellus is at all correct in painting a faction of the Euchites as persons willing to engage in murder and debauchery, it is no surprise that nothing short of obsessive continual prayer or some other occupying mental process could chance to defend them from the guilt, shame, and humiliation associated with their dark deeds. In closing, there is a great mystery to the ancient testimonies of a variety of apparitions and daemons, which we ultimately can't separate from contemporary phenomena. There are modern Christian narratives, for instance, about the alien abduction and UAP phenomena that present aliens as demons or fallen angels, similar to ancient Christians who may have encountered similar phenomena and had no other framework but daemons and evil spirits to put them in. In the exploration of what the evil spirits are and how they actually operate, I think of ancient and modern NDEs and OBEs, when souls are encountered in the other realm who are drawn back to the flesh and drawn to truly malevolent desires, even once they are disembodied. Souls legitimately attracted to filth and who cling to torment. In its original sense, as we find them in Homer and Hesiod, daemons are the spirits of men. For much like the philosophers claimed the souls of men would become daemons or gods after death, there are some of these souls who become twisted daemons feeding off and attracted to a fear reminiscent of their own state of insanity. This picture of demonic forces renders them into autonomous agents, out to deliver harm to their victims, perhaps even become the evil ghosts who haunt tragic locations. Another view, however, equates demons to negative thought processes, intrusive visions, evil nightmares, or unhinged desires. In this case, demons is rather a term applied to dysfunctional aspects of our consciousness and diseases of the body. But physicalizing the whole phenomena won't ring true to modern exorcists who see things we should never want to see and deal with situations which, however much dismissed by outsiders, are nonetheless extremely real for the people involved. Finally, I quote this last extract from the Chronographia, where Psellus is writing on his own manner of advising Emperor Constantine Monomachus, and gives us a glimpse into his own thoughts about the soul. Quote, "My life, as far as possible, was dedicated to the pursuit of philosophy, but I carefully accommodated myself to his every mood. There were certain occasions, therefore, when I would discourse to him in a philosophic vein. I would prove to him how the soul can be visible in the body, and again, how it can float above the body like a cork, but still attached to it. This phenomenon I compared to some object suspended in the air, balancing itself lightly on the wing, relying entirely on its own strength, and altogether unaffected by the weight of the bond that ties it to something else below it." With this treatise, I hope to have activated some curiosity as to what other spirits coexist alongside us and how these spirits may have been regarded throughout history and still relate to modern phenomena. Please like and subscribe, and if you would like to support the channel, you can leave me a tip on my personal Venmo link, where YouTube can't take 40% of your donation, or you can consider supporting the Patreon link below in the description. Until next time, slay your demons.